Moral perfectionism is the view that living well is a matter of becoming morally better, developing the virtues to the greatest possible extent you can, becoming extremely kind and generous and honest and brave. We saw last time that Mencius gives us a particularly extreme form of moral perfectionism. According to Mencius, the ultimate goal in moral development and also the best possible life is to extend your benevolence or your feelings of compassion outward beyond yourself and your immediate community, up to and including, the way he puts it, is the whole world. This is the most compassionate person, including toward those who hate you, including toward those who are incredibly unlike you, maybe even those who wish you harm. You are to love and feel compassion toward them, or that is at least the goal of the good life. Now, Susan Wolf, a contemporary philosopher working at UNC Chapel Hill, she has a really famous paper that was published in the Journal of Philosophy in the 1980s called Moral Saints. And Wolf argues in this paper that what she calls moral saints are not a particularly desirable ideal toward which we should strive. I'm going to set this up as Wolf giving us a kind of objection to moral perfectionism. I think as we go, it's worth considering both whether you agree with the premises of Wolf's argument, but then also whether there are versions of moral perfectionism that might escape Wolf's criticism. So, just to preview, I think that Aristotle's version of moral perfectionism, in which the doctrine of the mean plays a big role, may in fact have a response to Wolf that, for example, Mencius's moral perfectionism does not. Here's how Wolf defines a moral saint: a person whose every action is as morally good as possible. A person whose every action is as morally good as possible. So this is a morally perfect person. You can think of this, if you want to think of it in terms of virtues, you can think of each of the virtues, like kindness, like compassion, like bravery. And this person has them all, but they are also amped up to the kind of maximum possible degree for a human being. The way she puts this person's overarching sort of commitment in life is this: a necessary condition of moral sainthood would be that one's life be dominated by a commitment to improving the welfare of others or of society as a whole. So the moral saint does all of the things that are morally good. They go about relieving as much suffering as they can. They go about liberating those who need liberation. They go about doing as much good more broadly as they possibly can in the world. And they do it because they have this dominating commitment to doing what is right and good. Now, the opening line of Wolf's piece, very provocative, is this: I don't know whether there are any moral saints, but if there are, I am glad that neither I nor those about whom I care the most are among them. So what we have immediately in Wolf is she's very clear that she isn't sure whether or not there are any actual people who have reached moral saintliness. In Mencius's terms, she's not sure if there are any Mencius moral saints. I mean, we had a question last time: is becoming fully compassionate toward all even psychologically possible? And Wolf says, look, I don't know, but boy, am I glad that none of the people I care about, and I myself am not one of those people. The way she puts her thesis later in the piece directly connects up with our discussion of moral perfectionism about the good life. She says this: I believe that moral perfectionism, in the sense of moral saintliness, does not constitute a model of personal well-being toward which it would be particularly rational or good or desirable for a human being to strive. So, what we have with Wolf is a clear thesis that the good life is not the life of moral perfection. To the extent that you are cultivating in yourself morally perfect qualities, becoming perfectly kind, becoming perfectly compassionate, becoming perfectly honest, you are in fact straying from the well lived human life. Now, that is a surprising and provocative thesis. Her objection to the moral saint is not, in fact, a hedonistic one. So her objection is not that the moral saint is going to not experience pleasure in their life. That would be the hedonist's reason for rejecting moral saints. Her reason is something a little different. And before we lay out the argument, I think it's going to be useful to note, as she does, that there are two possible motivational structures that a moral saint might have. So a moral saint is just thinly defined as somebody whose every action is as morally good as can be. If they have a choice between doing A and B, if A is a little morally better than B, they will always choose A. Even if they want to do B, even if B is in their self interest, even if A is really hard, it doesn't matter. Consistent with that are two possible pictures of what might emotionally move a person to behave this way. When we ask why did they behave in that morally perfect way, one possibility is they did it out of love. And the way Wolf puts this is that this person enjoys being a moral saint. So when you ask them, why did you volunteer a bunch of hours at the soup kitchen? I mean, they will say really two things, but the two things in a way for them are one. The first thing they'll say is, that's the right thing to do. I'm doing the most good I can. But the second thing they'll say is, it makes me happy to do that. And for them, doing the right thing is what makes them happy. That is what she calls the loving saint. Again, we don't know if there are any moral saints, but perhaps if there are, Nelson Mandela might be an example of a loving saint. This person had, despite all of the trials he faced, quite a bit of joy if you read his autobiography. He was sort of overflowing with satisfaction and happiness, a deep sense of fulfillment about how he had lived his life. But there's another possible motive that a moral saint might have. You could do all of the right things all the time, but be really bummed out about it effectively. Like you would much rather be spending time on your hobbies or spending time with your family or spending time studying or just spending time relaxing and doing nothing. But you believe, using your reason, that the morally correct thing for you to do is go volunteer at the soup kitchen. This person is somebody for whom their personal happiness, their sense of satisfaction and of pleasure, does not at all lie in the happiness of others, or at least not in this kind of way. This person is what Wolf calls the rational saint. This is the second type of moral saint that we can distinguish. The rational saint is set up more like you and I in that they would rather be doing something else, but they force themselves to go out and do the right thing. The way she puts it is, the way Wolf puts it at one point, is that they experience morality as the burden that it is. They don't feel it as a sort of light thing that they would rather spend their time doing. Again, we don't know if there are any moral saints, but Mother Teresa perhaps could be considered to have some of the hues, so to speak, of a rational saint. If you read her writings after her that were published after her death, her diaries, she was deeply depressed. And she also had, at many points, effectively lost her faith in God. And it was partly as a result of the incredible trauma she was experiencing living in Calcutta and seeing the kind of pain and evil that her fellow human being was suffering. There was this sense of, God has abandoned this place, God has abandoned me, And it's just everything I can do to get out of bed in the morning and keep doing this work. To get you thinking about Woolf's objection, um, you should, I think, ask yourself the following questions, and these will be opportunities for you to discuss on the discussion post. First, would you want to be best friends with a moral saint? Why or why not? And I think it's also going to be interesting to think a little bit about whether it makes a difference if this person is a rational saint or a loving saint. Would you want to marry a moral saint? Would you want your husband or your wife to be um, Nelson Mandela or to be Mother Teresa or some other hypothetical, even better person who literally spends every waking moment doing all of the good they can for the world? I mean, keep in mind the radical implication of this lifestyle. You might want to spend some alone time with your spouse. Your spouse, though, will realize I can do much more good for more people by going to the soup kitchen and feeding hungry people. You know, I could do some good for you, but you're just one person, husband or wife, and I could feed a whole bunch of hungry people if I didn't spend that time with you. Because they are a moral saint, they will always choose to do what morality demands of them over and above their commitments to you and to their friends. The final question is, would you want to be a moral saint? And this goes directly to the issue of whether moral sainthood is a good model or rational model of well-being toward which we should be striving. I want you to think about these and post about them in the discussion forum. Okay, so here is, I think, the conclusion of Woolf's argument. We're going to call this the moral saints argument, and I'm sort of reconstructing this as an argument against moral perfectionism. So the conclusion is that the life of the moral saint is not the good life. We could also put it this way: the life of moral perfection is not the good life. The argument draws on the following idea. Woolf never gives us a definition of this idea, but she does give us examples. She says, look, moral virtue is an incredible good. It is a way of being excellent as a human. But there are also non-moral virtues. There are other kinds of human excellences. These include skills, like being an excellent musician, being an excellent athlete, being an excellent painter. These include having mastered bodies of knowledge, history, literature, philosophy. These include hobbies and interests, cooking, fashion. She mentions interior design. They also, she lists some personality traits as potential sources of non-moral virtues. I mean, think of somebody with a really sharp sense of humor. That is a good and desirable trait, and it's a way of being excellent as a human that isn't exactly a moral quality. Or even somebody who's just cool. You know, like being cool is, of course, the sort of thing that varies socially depending on the context, but it's something we all want to be, and it is better to be cool than uncool, generally speaking. It's what we want to be. So each of these has a desirability about them that is separate and apart from morality. Woolf says that although none of these particular non-moral virtues should be considered necessary for a well-lived life, a life in which none of them are developed is, the way she puts it, strangely barren. So this sets us up for her argument. The first premise of the argument is this: the moral saint's life has no non-moral virtues. The moral saint's life has no non-moral virtues. It is barren of any skills, of any relationships, of a romantic life. It is barren of good friendships. It lacks, hobbies. It's barren, except for this one value, this one commitment: morality, their obsession. Second premise is that the good life does require some non-moral virtues. Again, she's not saying, oh, you have to be an interior designer in order to live the good life. That would be stupid. Her view is not that. Instead, she's saying you need a thing. It could be something very different from what other people have, but you need to have some hobbies. You need to have, some athletic pursuit that you at least strive in your free time toward. You need to have a career of some kind that you're working on, and you need to have good relationships with people you love more than random strangers you meet on the street. Those are all essential elements of the life well lived. So let's just walk through these premises briefly. The moral saint's life has no non moral virtues. Why think this? Well, the way she puts it is that morality tends to crowd out the non moral virtues. What does this mean? Well, her thought here is first and foremost a practical one, which is something like this. If you are spending all of the time you can fulfilling your moral commitments, your moral obligations are in a way so draining and so endless. I mean, there's so much good to be done in the world that you literally will have no time in the day left to. She lists some examples. In other words, if the moral saint is devoting all his time to feeding the hungry or healing the sick or raising money for Oxfam, then necessarily he's not reading Victorian novels, playing the oboe, or improving his backhand. You spent all day at the soup kitchen, you're exhausted, you get home, it's 10 o'clock at night. Are you going to go out there and practice your backhand? Of course not. You're going to sleep so that you can get up the next morning and do it again. That's the kind of practical crowding out. So we have plenty of pictures of some like morally admired figures like this. We have no photos of Gandhi playing golf or down there of Mandela painting, and that is no accident. Of course, part of the reason is that those figures spent all of their time on other things. I mean, Gandhi started as a lawyer, but he had to, of course, abandon his law practice once he started his social work. We have pictures like this of MLK and Mother Teresa, but there are no badly photoshopped pictures of the two of them hanging out and playing Smash Bros with each other. Not just because Smash Bros wasn't invented at the time, but also because for them, justice and doing good was their only commitment. I think there are also logical inconsistencies potentially with living the life of a moral saint and certain other non moral virtues that we might desire. Certain kinds of humor seem incompatible logically with sort of Mencius style compassion. Being adventurous and taking risks seems to be logically incompatible with being perfectly prudent and careful. And then I think also some forms of art necessarily butt up against exceptionless moral principles. So there's another kind of crowding out there as well. The second premise is that the good life does require some of these non moral virtues. And in defense of this claim, Woolf doesn't have a lot to say. I mean, the first thing she points out is just that, it is interesting that most of our actual role models have some non moral virtues. And if you ask people who their sort of role models or heroes are, sometimes they'll mention MLK, but more often than not, they'll mention, they'll mention singers, they'll mention football players, they'll mention CEOs. And that's not to say that those people are better, all things considered, or necessarily living better lives. But what it does suggest is that we, as a matter of what we actually value, we do care about non-moral virtues quite a bit. So she says we make ideals out of athletes, scholars, and artists, out of cowboys and private eyes and rock stars. And that is not an insignificant fact if we're trying to figure out what the life well lived is. It matters who we actually admire because that shows us what we actually care about. She says this: the feats of Groucho Marx, Reggie Jackson, and the head chef at Lutece are impressive accomplishments that it is not only permissible but positively appropriate to recognize as such. In general, the admiration of and striving toward achieving any of the great variety of forms of personal excellence are character traits it is valuable and desirable for people to have. So her point is not only that we actually admire um, people's non-moral excellences and strive to be like them, but that is a right and good thing for us to be doing. Those are good ways of being a human. It is appropriate for us to value those things. Then, of course, the question is, well, then what is the kind of balance between moral considerations and non-moral ones? Because Wolf categorically does not say that you should therefore throw morality aside. I think her claim is instead that living well requires balancing the what would otherwise be all-consuming domain of morality in your life against other kinds of goods. And that balancing act is difficult, but she says this: a person may be perfectly wonderful without being perfectly moral. And that is her, I think, summation of the lesson that she takes away from this argument against moral perfectionism. You can be perfectly wonderful, in other words, living extremely well, even if you have moral flaws.